Hey everyone, my name's Ash and I'm one of the founders of the Conservancy Trust. I've come on today to tell you a little bit about my favourite family group of birds of prey. This is an idea which I think has come from Louise or one of her team, who looks after all the marketing and the social media, and said that we were allowed to indulge ourselves and tell you about our favourite birds. And you may have seen Andy last week, who came on and told you about eagles. Well, for me, my favourite family group of birds, and it was a very close run thing between vultures and falcons just nicked it for me. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the falcons that we have at the Trust. Why falcons? Well, one, I just love watching them fly. I think they're just beautiful to watch in the air. Two, I love the audience's reaction of when you fly a falcon. When a falcon stoops in over their heads at about 100 miles an hour and you see everybody's faces light up, it's terrific to see. And thirdly, the relationship that you can have with them when you work with them. They're very confiding birds, and you can have a real affinity to a falcon. One way in which they show you that they're starting to trust you when you're training them, by the way, is what's called feeking. So when a falcon is feeding and it's finished its meal, it'll normally clean its beak on a rock and sort of move its beak from side to side. When you're training them, you feed them on the fist, and when they finish feeding, if they're starting to trust you, a young falcon will just lean across and then she'll wipe her beak on your shirt, and she'll get all horrible stuff all over your shirt, but it's just wonderful because it's saying that she's starting to trust you. When we fly them in front of the public, you get mixed reactions. Children normally adore falcons. You always get lots of questions from kids with falcons, and normally the first question you get from the children is what's the fastest bird of prey in the world? And when you tell them it's a peregrine falcon and they can fly at over 100 miles an hour, you can see their eyes light up. And then little boys normally ask, what's the biggest thing it can kill? And they always get terribly excited about the falcons that might catch something when they're flying in display. I remember on one occasion we had a school party in, I don't know how you describe them, a small group, naughty children, a small group of naughty children, and a WI. Women's Institute. Not a great combination, to be honest with you, WI and a group of naughty children, and they're all sat in amongst one another, and the children are being quite naughty, and you can see that the WI ladies aren't particularly happy. And there's one little boy who's being naughtier than any of the others, and he's standing up and shouting, and we're trying to get him to sit down. Anyway, when we flew the falcon, he was just mesmerised. He just couldn't take his eyes off of this bird, and as it stooped in over his head, he was almost in awe of the bird. In fact, I remember swinging the lure and trying to manoeuvre the falcon so that it would come really close to him. And when the falcon hit the lure and landed on the ground, this little boy looked over to the lady from the WI and he went, "Wasn't that bleeding graceful?" And she looked at him and she said, she sort of paused, and then she said, "My dear boy, it was rather spectacular, wasn't it?" And just for that moment you thought, hey, he got it. That little boy hopefully will have a love for birds of prey for the rest of his life by watching the falcon fly at the Hawk Conservancy. Another reason for loving falcons is the reaction from the young members of the team when they come to work at the Trust. So they learn to fly birds when they come on their apprenticeship schemes, but the one bird that they really want to fly is a falcon. And that's because they all aspire to want to swing a lure. You've probably watched Gary swing a lure, and it's sort of almost like poetry in motion when he's flying the bird. And so the young falconers will go up to the lower flying grounds or at the Africa arena, after work, and they'll practice swinging a lure, sometimes for months and months before they're given the opportunity to actually have a go at flying a falcon. If there's two apprentices, or they can find a friend, one of them will swing the lure and the other one will pretend to be a falcon. So you see these two adults, one of them rushing across the field, flapping their wings, pretending to be a falcon, and then the young falconer has to present the lure in the correct way so that the other falconer pretends to catch the bird. Anyway, when they finally get a go, they never do it in front of people because it's just far too nerve-wracking. Normally somebody like Gary or Mike will watch them fly it, and it's always a particular falcon. So you wouldn't, for instance, put a super fast falcon in front of an aspiring young falconer. And there's 3 falcons that I can think of over the years that have taken on that role. Right back in the early days was a lanner falcon. Lanners, I just love lanners. They're my favourite falcon to spend time with. An African falcon. And we used to fly them a lot in the 70s and 1980s. And this falcon was called Blue, and she was in her late teens, and she was slow and steady and good for young falconers. And then we had a Lugger falcon. Well, you may have seen the Lugger falcon at the Trust that's flying now. Tom's flying her, and her name, this was a bird in the 1990s, was called Amy. And she flew beautifully, and the young falconers would fly her. And more recently is a falcon called Drifter, who is a Saker falcon, and Drifter has been the bird which the young falconers have flown. So it's always a great time in a young falconer's career. Telemetry is often used on the falcons. Well, it's kind of always used on the falcons. It's because they travel great distances. In fact, you're trying to get the falcon to go as high as you can. Gary's got a big thing about this. He loves his falcons to go up really, really high. If you watch him in display, he gets more excited when he sees his falcon at sort of 2,000 feet. I think nowadays he's got one of these things which he can tell just how high it goes, and if it makes 5,000 feet, he's the happiest chap at the Hawk Conservancy for the rest of the day. But the visitors think that when you put a transmitter on, they can do some quite strange things. I had one visitor one day who asked me if the bird was carrying a radio transmitter, did it mean you could chat to them while they were up there, which you can't. I had another visitor that thought that the bird became remotely controlled when it wore a transmitter, so that if you turn the receiver from right to left, you could actually turn the bird from right to left. You can't do that either. And lastly was a small child who suggested that if the bird did wear a radio transmitter, if it did fly off, well, you could always blow the bugger up. Well, you can't do that either. You can't blow a bird up if it's wearing a transmitter. So for all of those reasons, that's why I love watching the falcons fly. I have a friend who's an actress, and she said what makes a good display is when you have an assault on all the senses. And I think if you're flying a falcon in Reggie's Meadow and you can smell the flowers, you can hear the bells of the falcon when she's flapping her wings, and then you feel the falcon flying over your heads, you're getting pretty close to an assault on all the senses. My dad used to love Shakespeare, and he used to quote to me, "As a falcon her bells, so shall man hath his desires." And I've lived with that quotation most of my life, and it still resonates with me today. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you're all well, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye bye.